Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place where the air smells faintly of baked mud, goat hair, and crushed dates. You're walking through the crowded streets of ancient Babylon. Yes, that Babylon, with the crumbling ziggurats, suspiciously long lines outside bakeries that only sell one kind of bread. It's hot, there's dust everywhere. Your sandals are already ruined, and it's only mid-morning. To your left, a woman is haggling over a clay jar of fermented fig wine. To your right, a man with a long beard and even longer scroll is shouting about someone. Nobody's paying attention, not even the goats. Welcome to the land of the world's first receipts. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here to buy something simple: barley. Not exotic, not fancy, just a satchel of plain old barley. It should be easy. But as you soon realize, nothing in Babylon is easy when it involves other people, their goats, or math. The merchant, a stern-looking man with sun-scorched skin and 3 visible teeth, greets you with a grunt. His stall is a mess of baskets, grain sacks, and a suspiciously well-fed cat. You ask for a handful of barley. He nods, but instead of giving it to you, he asks, "Do you have a seal?" A seal. You look around for an animal, but he means the kind you press into clay, a signature, Babylonian style. And no, you don't have one. You didn't realize buying groceries would require paperwork. The merchant sighs. "You'll need a scribe," he mutters. Before you know it, you're shuffled off to a shady corner of the market, where a teenage boy sits cross-legged with a block of wet clay, a stylus, and the air of someone who regrets all his life choices. This is your first encounter with the Babylonian receipt system, an elaborate dance involving scribes, clay tablets, and a lot of creative interpretation. The scribe asks your name. You tell him. He squints, then scratches something into the clay that might be cuneiform, or might be a drawing of a duck. You're not sure. He asks what you're buying, how much, and from whom. Then he glances over and carves a few more symbols into the slab. He flips the tablet, rolls a small carved cylinder over it, your merchant's seal, and hands it to you like he's just handed you a winning lottery ticket. Congratulations. You now owe someone barley. Or maybe you're owed barley. It depends on who's reading the tablet and whether they're holding it upside down. And this ridiculous sun-drenched, goat-filled mess is why the Babylonians invented receipts. Because memory is unreliable, and people, frankly, lie a lot. You see, the Babylonian economy wasn't exactly based on trust. It was based on deferred payment, long-distance trade, temple rations, and neighbors who claimed they gave you 3 sheep when they definitely only gave you 1, and it was sickly. So writing it down became a necessity. Mainstream historians agree that the first receipts weren't meant for taxes or noble record-keeping. They were created to track mundane things: barley deliveries, sheep transfers, how much beer the workers at the canal were promised, but never got. One of the earliest known receipts simply says, "1 sheep delivered, witness Haru, son of Fish." But historians still argue whether receipts were primarily a temple innovation used by priests to track sacred goods and tributes, or whether they emerged first from local markets, where merchants just got tired of being scammed by fast-talking barley dealers. What's clear is that once people realized you could trap a promise in clay, they never looked back. Clay tablets became the glue that held Mesopotamian trade together, sometimes literally, when they weren't fired properly and started sticking to each other in the heat. You trudge back to the barley stall and present your squishy tablet. The merchant sniffs, checks the seal, grumbles something about scribes these days, and hands you your barley. Transaction complete. But as you walk away, barley in hand, you hear him mutter to another customer, "That one owes me a goat. He'll be back." So begins your uneasy journey into Babylon's paperless, but incredibly clunky, bureaucratic system. You're beginning to realize something about Babylon. Nobody trusts anybody. You've barely finished chewing a gritty bite of barley when someone at a nearby stall starts arguing over a loan that supposedly happened 3 months ago. The problem? Nobody wrote it down. The lender says it was for 2 bags of lentils and a borrowed donkey. The borrower insists it was 1 bag and a very sick goat. There is yelling. There is spitting. A bystander quietly eats dates and enjoys the show. You edge away. Back in your day, by which we mean modern times, you just tap a card or scan a code. But here, you need documentation for everything, including your snack. So you decide to buy something else for research purposes. Barley was fine, but now you want something slightly more exotic, say a handful of dates or some dried figs. You walk to a different stall, run by an older woman with ink-stained hands and a nose that points due west. She's calm, efficient, and already reaching for a clay tablet before you even open your mouth. You get the sense this isn't her first fruit-related transaction. She asks how much you want, and you name a small amount, enough for a snack. She nods, then gestures to her assistant, who's sitting in the back, under a reed awning, sculpting a tablet with slow, deliberate care. He's got the patience of a monk and the back pain of someone who's been doing this since the Bronze Age. He begins to write. This time you pay closer attention. He's not just scribbling numbers, he's noting the date, the buyer, the seller, and the quantity. Then he carefully marks a few symbols that you're told represent witnesses. You glance around, confused. Witnesses. Sure enough, 2 men standing nearby step forward and press their seals into the clay. One of them winks at you. The other just burps. Congratulations, your snack is now legally binding. Here's the thing, without coins or cash, Babylon ran almost entirely on promises. You'd agree to pay someone back with goods or services later, and you'd record it all on clay. Receipts were proof that your word, however flaky, was locked in place. Forget oral agreements. In Babylon, only tablets told the truth. Mainstream scholars often point to the Ur-Thur period, around 2100 BCE, as the heyday of administrative claywork. This is when receipts became so widespread that even minor transactions had their own stylized forms. We're talking rations for royal gardeners, scribbled notes about borrowed oxen, and entire ledgers devoted to temple beer, literal beer math, all of it captured in tiny wedges and dots. But here's a weird little fringe tidbit. Some tablets show signs of revision, like someone came back and tried to edit the terms of their agreement. And yes, there are scratch marks where people apparently tried to erase unfavorable deals with a wet reed, not unlike trying to change your credit card statement by stabbing it with a spoon. Historians still argue whether these edits were honest mistakes or very ancient fraud. You keep wandering, receipt in hand, and notice something else. Nobody keeps these tablets in their pockets. There are no purses, no scroll cases, not even a stylish leather satchel. Instead, people store these receipts in shared archives, small clay shelves tucked behind shops, temples, or courtyards. The idea is, you can come back and check it if you dare. But that doesn't stop arguments. Not even close. Down the street, you see a man shout, "I returned your ox." His opponent yells back, "Then where's the tablet?" The response, "Your son ate it." Now that sounds ridiculous, but cuneiform tablets weren't always fired. When dried in the sun, they were surprisingly edible. Well, at least to desperate goats or unruly children. One receipt from a temple archive even has clear tooth marks. Scholars lovingly refer to these as chewiform damage. So, you clutch your little clay tablet a bit tighter, just in case. Receipts, you're beginning to understand, weren't just about keeping records. They were armor in a society powered by IOUs and fuzzy memories. Whether you were trading grain, marrying off your daughter, or borrowing your neighbor's donkey, that squishy slab of dirt was your legal shield. You sit down beneath a palm tree, sweating slightly, and wondering how anyone got anything done in a world where you had to file paperwork for figs. But even now, in this heat, there's a strange satisfaction in it all. The permanence, the ritual, the way everyone seems to know that, without these clay tokens, the entire system would collapse. And yes, it's bureaucratic. Yes, it's ridiculous. But there's a strange soothing order to it. Everything written, everything sealed, even your afternoon snack. You've barely digested your figs, and the concept of clay-based bureaucracy. When you hear the unmistakable squelch of wet mud, you turn and see a courier hustling down the street, arms full of freshly molded tablets that look about 2 hours away from melting. He's sweating, he's swearing, and he's late. You watch him dart between stalls, ducking under hanging baskets, and nearly flattening a group of toddlers. One wrong step, and he'll drop Babylon's entire barley supply chain into a puddle. But somehow, miraculously, he doesn't. He slides into a shadowy alcove where a man in a long linen robe, clearly important, clearly over it, gestures for him to sit. You edge closer and pretend to admire a jar of pickled onions. The courier unloads the tablets one by one. The robed man, a temple scribe with a permanent frown, inspects them with bored precision. Occasionally, he grunts approval. Other times, he sighs deeply, as if the universe itself has disappointed him. One tablet is cracked, another is still wet and warping in the heat. He mutters something about new hires. This is your first look at Babylon's clay tablet hustle, a system that looks chaotic, but is actually an astonishing feat of logistics. Behind every farmer's promise, every trader's deal, is a network of scribes, couriers, and filing shelves that somehow keeps the city from collapsing into a barter-based food fight. The scribe takes a reed stylus and starts jotting a new receipt based on the half-legible data he just received. You lean in and catch a few symbols, grain symbols, quantity marks, the sign for temple authority, and a curious little wedge pattern that may or may not be a joke at the courier's expense. You ask what it says. The scribe doesn't even look up. It means he's 2 deliveries behind, and probably cursed. Naturally, this is where the clay tablet system gets real. It's not just buyers and sellers anymore. It's middlemen, regulators, couriers, and document inspectors. You're in the heart of Babylonian administrative madness, where every transaction leaves a trail, and every trail needs managing. Mainstream historians agree that by the late 3rd millennium BCE, scribes weren't just recording receipts, they were building entire databases. Sure, they didn't have Excel, but they had shelf rows, lots of shelf rows, organized by topic, date, and sometimes smell. But here's where it gets weird. Fringe researchers have found tablet archives buried in random houses, not temples, not palaces, just homes. Which begs the question, was everyone in Babylon keeping receipts on the side? Were there secret hoarders, historical hobbyists, or did ancient parents just want proof their teenage sons did in fact borrow 3 sheep and not return them? Historians still argue whether these home archives were part of official networks or just clever households trying to cover their legal backsides. Back outside, the scribe's assistant returns with a portable kiln, the Babylonian equivalent of a paper shredder, but in reverse. This device doesn't destroy tablets, it preserves them. Once the clay is inscribed, the assistant gently slides the tablets into the kiln to fire them. If done right, they'll last forever. If done wrong, well, they explode. You watch as the assistant carefully stacks the tablets, lights the small kiln, and starts whispering what sounds suspiciously like a prayer. Even now, 4,000 years later, you can tell this process is part business, part ritual. After a while, the courier heads off again, new tablets in hand, another transaction, another promise, sealed in stone. But as he disappears into the sun-baked alleyways, the scribe looks at you, eyes half-lidded, and asks, "So, do you need a loan? Do you?" You're not sure what Babylonian interest rates look like, but they probably involve goats, and possibly a clause about moon phases. Still, you're tempted, not because you need the money, but because you want to see what happens next. Because now you understand that the receipt isn't the end of a transaction, it's just the beginning. You hesitate, then nod. Because why not? When in Babylon, take a questionable loan, the scribe doesn't smile. Babylonians don't really smile so much as grimace approvingly. He waves you over to a low stone bench and pulls out a fresh lump of clay, still warm from sitting in the sun. It squishes between his fingers with a satisfying plop, and just like that, you're part of the oldest financial ritual on record. You're taking a loan from a temple, with witnesses, and yes, there will be a receipt. But first, the terms. You're told you'll receive 1 silver shekel's worth of goods, not actual silver, of course. That's just a unit of measure. You'll actually get about 30 liters of barley, a jug of date wine, and possibly a goat. If the goat in question agrees, you ask when it must be repaid. The scribe answers dryly, before the month of Ululu ends, or else. You try not to ask what "or else" means. This is your first taste of temple banking, because in Babylon, temples didn't just do religion, they did finance. They owned land, loaned out grain, rented donkeys, and charged interest like seasoned professionals. You're not here to worship, you're here to owe. Mainstream historians often describe Babylonian temples as the earliest proto-banks. They held vast grain stores, controlled loans, and used scribes to document every transaction. In fact, it was often safer to borrow from a temple than a private lender, mostly because private lenders had fewer qualms about threatening your sheep. Still, the process was ceremonial. 2 scribes assist the lead scribe now. One holds a stylus, another prepares the seal. A third witness arrives, a local priest wearing far too much eye makeup, and nods solemnly. You're asked to raise your hand and confirm you understand the terms. You do, sort of. Now comes the fun part, the writing. The stylus carves out a string of symbols onto the clay, the parties involved, the goods exchanged, the repayment deadline, and just for flavor, what happens if you default. It mentions seizure of livestock, public shaming, and a very vague line about eternal disfavor from Enlil. You don't know who Enlil is, but he sounds unforgiving. And here comes the quirky part. The scribe pauses, looks at you, and says, "Now choose your seal." Turns out, people in Babylon often had personal cylinder seals, tiny carved rollers they pressed into clay to mark their identity. Think signature, but more fashionable. If you didn't have one, you could use a default temple seal, or, in rare cases, press your thumbprint into the clay like a Neolithic mugshot. You choose a temple seal for now, an elaborate carving that shows a lion chasing a very nervous bird. The scribe rolls it across the bottom of the tablet, and it leaves a clean, gorgeous imprint. The tablet is finished. A tiny brick of promises and barley-fueled ambition. It's handed to a runner, who'll deliver it to the temple's vault, an actual storeroom of clay, where it will be filed next to thousands of others, each one humming with potential legal drama. And just like that, you're in debt. But it's weirdly comforting. There's no fine print, no sudden interest hikes, no suspicious fees labeled processing adjustment surcharge, just a tablet, your name, a seal, and the entire temple economy watching you. As you leave the temple, the priest pats your shoulder and says, "Don't worry, Enlil only smites on Wednesdays." Charming. You step back into the sun, and for a moment, everything seems sharper. The sounds of merchants, the laughter of children, the occasional honk of what might be a goose. You've entered Babylon's financial bloodstream, and your receipt is the proof. Historians still argue whether Babylonian temples truly saw themselves as banks, or simply evolved into that role out of necessity. After all, who else had the scribes, storage, and muscle to make sure people paid back their barley loans? But one thing is certain, temples didn't just preserve souls, they preserved records. By now, you've acquired a respectable collection of receipts, barley, figs, a temple loan, and a vague sense of financial responsibility. You're practically a citizen, but you still don't know how these scribes do what they do. So you ask around, you want to meet one. A real one. Not the bored teen who spelled your name like a fish earlier. You're pointed to the southern edge of the city, just past the dried-up irrigation channel, and a suspiciously aggressive goose. There, nestled beneath a cluster of reed huts, is the scribal school, a quiet little enclave that smells like clay dust, old sandals, and anxiety. Inside, it's not what you expected. There are no scrolls, no soft music, no scholarly calm. Instead, the room echoes with the groans of adolescents, scratching symbols into clay tablets, while a balding man in a robe walks between them, muttering, "No, that's not the word for cow, that's the word for curse. Try again unless you want your cousin hexed." You've arrived in the world of Babylon's scribal drama. A wiry boy with smeared clay on his nose offers you a seat. His tablet is covered in cuneiform, some of it right, some of it not. You point to one symbol and ask what it means. He squints. "That says 10 goats, I think." A few minutes later, the teacher leans over, squints harder, and says, "That says 10 gods." Silence. The boy gulps and starts furiously scraping off the mistake with a thin reed. You realize suddenly that Babylonian scribes lived in constant fear of writing something cosmically offensive by accident. After all, it's not every day that a minor misprint could lead to divine wrath and a canceled feast day. Mainstream historians agree. Scribes were the elite class of nerds. They trained for years. They had to memorize thousands of symbols. They copied legal texts, royal decrees, debt ledgers, hymns, curses, and even laundry lists. Some scribes specialized in palace work. Others worked for temples, or merchants, or that one guy who just really liked keeping track of his lentil collection. But here's your fun tidbit. Not all scribes were men. In a few preserved letters, there are references to female scribes, though rare, they existed. Some worked in temples, others in households, and one particularly sharp woman from Sippar once corrected a tax scribe's tablet and caused a 3-day bureaucratic meltdown. Historians still argue whether scribal errors were ever deliberate. Could a clever scribe manipulate contracts for their own gain? Could they change one wedge and erase a debt? Officially, no. Realistically, absolutely yes. Some receipts even include the phrase, "copied from original tablet," which was the ancient version of "no funny business, I swear." As you sit among the students, watching them craft symbols with practiced care, you begin to appreciate the subtle beauty of the system. Each stroke of the stylus means something. Every angle, every wedge has weight. There's no delete key here, no undo, just you, the clay, and whatever story you commit to it. One student finishes his exercise, a fake receipt for 20 jars of honey, and offers it to you. "You can keep it," he says proudly. "It's not binding." You thank him. You're not sure what to do with it. but it does smell nice. As you head outside, tablet in hand, the sun is beginning to dip behind the rooftops, casting the city in a warm orange haze. The shadows stretch longer, and the air cools just enough to make you forget about your barley debt. For now, you've seen the process, the training, and the pressure. And one thing is clear: receipts aren't just notes, they're stories, tiny, baked, bureaucratic stories. Evening settles, like warm dust over Babylon. You're strolling past rows of palm trees that seem to sigh in the breeze, feeling pretty smug about your new knowledge of cuneiform, until you hear shouting from a nearby storeroom. Not angry shouting, just the unmistakable tone of someone being very dramatic about lentils. You peek inside. It's a palace storeroom, one of the big ones, operated by stewards in gold-trimmed robes who all somehow look like they haven't slept since the last lunar eclipse. Inside are shelves stacked with clay tablets, baskets of dried goods, amphorae of oil, and one poor scribe slumped against a support column, clutching a tablet and groaning. A woman in a tight braid and tighter patience is arguing with him. This says I received 12 sacks of barley last week. I only took 10. Check the tablet again. He moans without looking up. You signed it. You step around the doorway, curiosity winning out over etiquette. She notices you. Hey, new face. Want to learn how a grain receipt starts a 4-day argument? Absolutely you do. She hands you a clay tablet, surprisingly smooth and cool in your hands. You flip it over. It's written in tidy, practiced cuneiform. It's dated, sealed, and carries a small note that catches your eye. Portion includes excess due to temple overage. She huffs. I didn't ask for the overage. This is your crash course in palace receipts and ration drama. Turns out, Babylon's palaces weren't just homes for kings and cats. They were administrative megacenters that managed workers, food distribution, and enough paperwork to crush a donkey. Everyone who worked for the palace, from builders to weavers to pig herders, received wages in kind, mostly grain, oil, and beer. And yes, every delivery came with a receipt. Sometimes that receipt came with attitude. The scribe slowly gets up and rummages through a stack of tablets. We had a miscount, he mutters. The barley came in wet. Or maybe the scribes were. Mainstream scholars agree. Babylon's administrative system was astonishingly detailed. Workers were often paid in beer rations based on status, task, and weather conditions. There's an actual record of a canal digger receiving 1.5 liters of beer per day, while his supervisor received 3. The beer was thick, yeasty, and occasionally had to be chewed, but it counted, and if the beer didn't arrive on time, you'd bet there was a receipt. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many receipts included personal notes, not emotional letters, just little remarks like, delay due to oxen stuck in mud, or scribe injured hand while recording writing done by apprentice. It's the ancient equivalent of a sticky note saying, sorry for the mess. One tablet even ends with the snarky comment, counted twice, tell Nabu he's blind. Historians still argue whether this was just playful sarcasm or part of an early accountability system meant to shame lazy workers. Either way, it proves that Babylonians, like most humans, were not above petty documentation. You help the woman review the tablet again. Sure enough, the overage is marked, and her seal's there too. She sighs. Fine, keep your extra barley, but next time, I'm counting it myself. The scribe nods solemnly and adds, I'll write that down. You exit the storeroom as the torches are being lit outside, casting flickering shadows across the clay walls. There's a quiet magic to it all. This massive network of people who spend their days writing about rations with the same solemnity others reserve for poetry. You pass a scribe etching symbols onto a fresh tablet by moonlight. He doesn't look up, but he says softly, you need a receipt for that smile. You laugh. He grins without breaking his focus. In a city run on clay, Even jokes leave a trace. You wake the next morning to the rhythmic slosh-slosh of something being stirred in a clay vat. Following the sound, you end up at a construction site where half the crew is digging a canal and the other half is standing around chanting more beer with increasing passion. At first, you assume it's some kind of morning ritual. It is, sort of. This is your introduction to Babylonian worker rations, and the most important item on every receipt: beer. A supervisor, with arms like tree trunks and a sunburn that looks like it filed a complaint, waves you over. You the one who's curious about receipts? He grunts. You're gonna love this. He points to a squat man seated behind a table of clay tablets, each one slightly cracked and covered in fine etchings. Beside him is a jug, a very large, very important jug. 3 cups per ditch digger, 5 for supervisors, 1 for my cousin, even though he only shows up when we're halfway done. He laughs. You don't. That jug? It's wage currency. You watch as workers line up, receive their ration, and then stamp their seals into a clay tablet kept by the supervisor. It's oddly formal for something that involves sloshing fermented bread liquid into wooden mugs, and yet there's a dignity to it. Mainstream historians often cite these beer rations as one of the earliest examples of labor documentation. The beer itself was thick, porridge-like, and filled with nutrients, more meal than beverage. Workers weren't paid in coin but in kind: barley, oil, and this sacred brew. And receipts were the only way to ensure they actually got what they were owed. The scribe glances up at you. Once we forgot to document 2 men, he says. They started a small revolt, stole the supervisor's sandals, took us a week to find them. Here's your quirky detail. Some receipts from these sites included stylized drawings, little cartoon-like figures to help scribes remember which Abu was which. One Abu had a triangle hat. Another Abu had an unusually shaped foot. These weren't exactly flattering, but they were effective. Historians still argue whether these drawings were standard practice or just a frustrated scribe's version of doodling. Either way, they offer rare glimpses of personality in an otherwise wedge-filled world. The worksite continues in a blur of motion. Workers lift stones, dig furrows, and shout at oxen who clearly do not care. The beer keeps flowing. The receipts keep coming. One man asks if he can collect his cousin's portion too. The scribe sighs. Bring me the seal. He does. It's cracked, likely borrowed, possibly stolen. The scribe raises an eyebrow and records the transaction anyway. You ask why. He shrugs. If he lies, it'll show up later. Everything does. It's oddly comforting, this belief in the power of documentation to eventually surface truth. Like the receipts themselves aren't just records, they're witnesses. By midday, the jug is nearly empty. The workers are slightly happier, and the canal has extended by maybe 2 meters. Not bad, by Babylonian standards. You sit under a canopy, sipping a small cup of beer yourself. It tastes like liquid bread, with a hint of yesterday's weather. One of the supervisors hands you a tablet. It's got your name, the portion of beer, and a smudged seal. He smirks. Now you've been paid. It's official. You're part of the system. By now, you've earned some street credibility. Your own barley receipt, a scribal souvenir, and a freshly sealed record of your canal beer. You even got a second mug without asking. That's status, but with status comes secrets. And tonight, you're about to witness a scandal. It starts innocently enough. A bustling courtyard outside the temple of Shamash, where the lamps glow golden and priests murmur prayers over incense that smells like burning raisins. You're wandering near a livestock pen, just looking at the goats, minding your business, when someone shouts, "Sheep are missing." You turn. A young man, clearly flustered, is waving a clay tablet and gesturing wildly at a portly priest who has mastered the art of not caring. The priest adjusts his headdress, sighs, and says, "Check the receipts." And just like that, you're caught in the sheep scandal of Sippar. It turns out The temple was entrusted with an enormous herd of sheep, temple-owned livestock, cared for by rotating staff. Every few days, a scribe logs the number of sheep, records births, deaths, wool harvests, and yes, missing animals. These logs are filed in a side room where clay dust collects faster than truth. Tonight, the count is short by 11 sheep. The receipts say they were here yesterday. The pens do not agree. You follow the group inside, past low torchlight and clay tablets, stacked like miniature tombstones. The sheep receipts are pulled, one by one, and read aloud. The shepherds get nervous. The priests get quieter. The scribes, they get really smug. Mainstream historians love cases like this. They're rare but revealing. When receipts clash with reality, Babylonians relied on multiple tablets to tell the fuller story: who signed off on what, when, and who witnessed it. It's the ancient version of calling your manager and pulling the email thread. And here's the curious detail. The tablets from this temple include strange little notations, double dots, oddly placed lines, tiny fingerprints. Some experts think these were internal flags used by scribes to indicate suspicion or error. Others think it was just bad handwriting. Historians still argue whether these marks were part of an early audit system or just grumpy scribes trying to warn each other silently. Don't trust this sheep count. As more receipts are examined, a pattern emerges. One junior priest has been logging more wool than is feasible, by a lot. A suspicious amount of wool, in fact, enough to stuff a small army's winter cloaks. You catch a glance at one of the tablets. The name reads Saziah, son of Malik. The head priest narrows his eyes. Saziah is called forth. He looks surprised, then guilty. Then he tries to faint. Nobody buys it. He's accused of skimming sheep, faking wool counts, and forging receipts by rolling the temple seal himself. A bold move, especially since he used the seal upside down. Oops. Everyone turns to the scribe in the corner. He lifts a tablet from the stack. It shows the same transactions Isaiah claimed, but a different date, and a witness who wasn't even in Sippar that day. This is how justice works here, not with swords, but with clay. A heated debate follows. Saziah insists it was a clerical mistake. The priests demand restitution. The sheep, of course, remain deeply silent. You think one of them winks at you. You might be sleep-deprived. Eventually, a resolution is reached. Saziah must pay back the temple, likely with a combination of wool, grain, and extreme humility. He's also forbidden from handling livestock of spiritual importance, which seems like a polite way to say, don't touch the holy goats again. The scribes update the existing receipt, marking the correction in a second tablet, what scholars now call a supplementary ledger. You're told it will be fired and stored forever. You ask why. Because lies fade, the lead scribe says. But Clay remembers. That line sticks with you. You step back into the night air, surrounded by the soft bleating of unimpressed sheep and the smell of scorched sandalwood. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat starts, celebrating nothing in particular. The scandal is over. The receipts are safe, and the goats, still not helpful. After a good night's sleep, interrupted only once by a loud donkey dream, you find yourself wandering the market streets again. Babylon hums with the morning light. The smell of spiced porridge wafts past clay walls, and somewhere nearby, a boy is trying to sell a broken basket, is gently used. You've been thinking a lot about that scandal at the temple. Not just the missing sheep, but the receipts. How everything depended on where they were, which shelf, whose hand, what time. So when you see a merchant rolling a tiny wheelbarrow full of clay tablets, you follow him. He's short, wiry, and determined, dressed in layered linen with sandals that flap like they're clapping for him. At first, you assume he's making a delivery, but as he stops at one stall after another, you realize he's not dropping off, he's using them. This is your first encounter with the portable receipt system. a traveling scribe and merchant who carries his own proof. At one stall, he buys fish. Yes, actual fish, with a pre-carved tablet. He checks the amount, rolls a small seal, and hands it over. The fishmonger eyes it, sniffs it, then nods and tucks it under a greasy basket. Next stall, same story. Dried figs. He records it himself. No middleman scribe, just him and the clay. You're impressed. Isn't that heavy? You ask. He grins. Not if you leave out the goats. This man is part of a growing class in ancient Babylon, the self-recording merchant. With the rise of trade and independent contracts, some merchants began to carry their own tablets, seals, and styluses, essentially becoming walking databases. Mainstream historians believe this shift marked a turning point in Babylon's economy. When individuals started handling their own record-keeping, commerce scaled faster. You didn't need a temple scribe or royal witness. You just needed good clay and a reputation for not being shady. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some merchants went overboard. There are preserved satchels, literal leather rolls, that held over 30 tablets. One merchant had receipts for everything from donkey rentals to date wine barters to a mysterious entry labeled glitter powder, 2 shekels, never again. We may never know what happened there. Historians still argue whether these traveling scribes blurred the line between formal record-keeping and personal bookkeeping. Some receipts were never submitted to official archives. They were used for a day, maybe a week, and then casually tossed or broken in half to symbolize a completed deal. You watch as your merchant friend pauses at a stall, then beckons you over. "You buying anything today?" he asks. You shrug. "Maybe, depends what's good." He opens a pouch at his hip and hands you a flat, rectangular tablet. It's blank. You write your deal, you seal it, you keep it. That way, no one can say you didn't pay. It feels empowering, slightly ridiculous, but empowering. So you try it. At the next stall, a man selling pickled onions and aggressively sour cheese. You ask for a tiny sample. You scribble your name, draw a symbol that might be the cuneiform for slightly fermented dairy, and mark it with the borrowed seal. The seller blinks at it. "Huh, haven't seen this style before. Looks like a frog sat on it." You hand it over anyway. Just like that, you're part of the mobile receipt revolution. It's faster, more personal, and way more chaotic. But there's something fun about seeing how the system adapts, how even in a city of temples and laws, people are carving their own path, literally. As the sun rises higher, and the market buzz swells around you, you look at your clay-streaked fingers, your tiny cheese receipt, and your increasingly heavy satchel. You're not just a visitor anymore. You're a participant in the strange, dusty ballet of ancient accounting, and you have the tablet to prove it. By now, you've racked up a solid pile of receipts. Barley, figs, beer, scandal-adjacent sheep, and that questionable cheese. You've scribbled on wet clay, borrowed seals, even handed out a tablet that looks suspiciously like a lopsided shoe. You're getting good at this. But today, things shift. You're summoned to the courtyard of a wealthy merchant, tall gates, polished stone, the whole "I invented receipts before they were cool" vibe. He greets you with practiced warmth and a twinkle that says, "I overcharge politely." You've tried the receipts, he says, but now it's time for the next level. Contracts. You raise an eyebrow. Aren't receipts just mini contracts? No, he chuckles. Receipts say something happened. Contracts say what better happened next. And just like that, you're plunged into the world of Babylonian fine print, where promises aren't just scribbled, they're carved, witnessed, sealed, and made terrifyingly official. You're seated beside a scribe, an interpreter, and 3 elderly men who exist solely to nod and stroke their beards. They're called witnesses, but honestly, they look like retired gossips. The scribe molds a clay tablet, flattens it with care, and begins, names of both parties, goods involved,
Exact date and moon phase.
location of transaction, delivery terms, repayment deadline, and a delightful clause about what happens if one party tries to back out. You blink. That's a lot. The merchant leans in. We're not making soup. We're making binding destiny. Mainstream historians consider this shift from informal receipt to binding contract a foundational leap in economic history. Contracts became a way to project stability into the future, tying people not just to deals, but to expectation. They enabled larger, longer-term trades, land leases, even marriage agreements. And here's your quirky detail. Some contracts included emotional clauses. One tablet read, "If the borrower cries out in distress, the lender must wait 3 days before claiming repayment." That's either compassion or a very slow collections department. Historians still argue whether these clauses reflected genuine social values or just clever scribes making deals more human. Either way, they made it into the baked record. Back at your merchant's courtyard, the scribe asks if you'd like to try crafting your own contract. You nod. He hands you a fresh clay slab, and you begin. Borrower me, lender a very trusting cheese vendor. Loan 1 wheel of stinky but excellent cheese. Repayment 5 clay compliments, and a possible sheep. The scribe reads it, snorts softly, then presses the merchant's seal beside yours. May your dairy dealings be eternal, he says, with mock solemnity. The witnesses each press their seals, one after the other, until your contract looks like a mosaic of tiny cuneiform stamps. You're told it will be fired and stored in a community vault, a stone-lined archive hidden inside the merchant district. Only the scribe and the head archivist know the exact shelf. Why all the secrecy, you ask? Because the merchant says, clay forgets nothing, but people try to make it forget anyway. That line stays with you as you walk away, because you've learned the power of a receipt. Yes, but a contract. That's where Babylon really comes alive. That's where law and clay and community collide in a system so robust, so absurdly detailed, that it's still impressing and mildly intimidating historians 4,000 years later. And here you are, holding your first legally binding dairy contract. How's that for career growth? You've done it. You've stepped fully into Babylon's bureaucratic web. And now you're starting to wonder, where does all of this clay actually go? You've handed off 6 tablets by now, and none of them have come back to haunt you. But surely they don't just disappear. So you ask around politely, of course, and that's how you find yourself being led through a narrow alley behind the temple district, ducking past dangling laundry and a goat that appears to be in charge. At the end, a small stone door. No sign, no guards, just a pair of sandals sitting out front. The man who opens it is older, slightly hunched, and covered in a thin dusting of gray powder. His name is Urdu. He doesn't say much, just waves you inside. You step through, and immediately you understand. This is Babylon's clay archive. The room is surprisingly cool. Walls lined with shelves, carved directly into mud brick. Each shelf is filled, edge to edge, with neatly stacked tablets, some small as a cookie, others the size of paving stones. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The air smells like dust, oil, and history. Urdu hands you a rag and points to the shelves. You're not just visiting, you're helping. As you wipe, he explains, each tablet is cataloged by transaction type, not date, so trade deals live together. Loan agreements share space with debt settlements. Temple receipts get their own section, and marriage contracts, for reasons that go politely unexplained, are kept in a locked box labeled simply delicate. Mainstream historians refer to these spaces as proto-libraries. More than just storage, they were active repositories, reference rooms, where scribes could check past deals, confirm ownership, or resolve disputes. Think customer service meets time capsule. But here's the weird part. Many of these tablets survived, not because they were carefully preserved, but because the buildings that housed them burned down. Fire-baked clay becomes nearly indestructible. In fact, some of our best preserved Babylonian records exist because of accidental arson. Urdu points to one particularly scorched corner of the room. That shelf, he says, was from a warehouse fire. The tablets were the only things left. You run your fingers across the surface of one. The cuneiform is still sharp. You can almost feel the stylus marks. The deal it contains, an agreement for a barley shipment with 2 witnesses and one very strict repayment clause, has outlived the man who made it, the donkey who delivered it, and probably the family that spent it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found a receipt tucked inside another tablet. A hidden note, almost like a footnote or secret clause. Scholars aren't sure whether it was sneaky legal maneuvering or just a lazy scribe storing 2 things in one. Historians still argue whether Babylonian archivists had true systems like catalog numbers or indexing methods, or if it was more instinct and memory. Third shelf from the left, behind the crooked one, next to the one that smells like garlic, that sort of thing. Urdu nods at you approvingly. You've dusted 4 shelves now, and only sneezed twice. He pulls a tablet off the top of a stack and hands it to you. This, he says, was my grandfather's first record. You look closer. It's over 70 years old. The symbols are crisp. The seal is faint, but still readable. It's a rental agreement. For a cow, not ownership, not sale, rental. 3 days, Urdu says. Cow returned in good health. No issues. You laugh. He needed a receipt for that? He smiles. He needed peace of mind. You place it back gently on the shelf and step out into the sunlight again, blinking. Behind you, 1,000 transactions hum quietly from the shadows, perfectly preserved in dust and fire. You may forget what you bought for lunch today, but Babylon remembers. The afternoon sun hangs heavy over Babylon, like a judgmental eye. You fan yourself with a reed scrap that used to be part of a receipt draft, and tell yourself you're not sweating, you're participating in historical immersion. That makes it sound noble. You've seen where the receipts go. You've seen how they're made. You've seen how they're misused, lost, eaten, edited, and sometimes stored in glorified clay closets. But now you stumble into something far stranger. What happens when a contract goes wrong? A small crowd has gathered outside a home near the temple gardens. At the center stands a man shouting about his ox being borrowed permanently. Another man stands arms crossed, fuming, and right between them, a short woman with a shaved head, 3 writing reeds tucked into her belt, and the terrifying calm of someone who has read every receipt. She is the dispute scribe, part judge, part professional eyebrow raiser. She beckons you closer. You watch as she pulls out 2 tablets from a basket. One is cracked. The other still has a faint thumbprint. She reads them slowly, muttering phrases like, in presence of 2 witnesses, 1 unit of livestock, repayment clause, conditional ownership. Then she sighs, deeply. This is why we don't let people write their own contracts using chicken bones. She turns to the crowd. Do we have witnesses? A tall man with a beard that could legally qualify as furniture steps forward. I witnessed the ox transaction, and I distinctly remember the clause about returning it on the full moon. The accused stammers. But it was cloudy. This is not going well for him. Mainstream historians point to Babylon's system of witnesses and divine appeals as a kind of proto-court system. Contracts and receipts weren't just between 2 people. They were public artifacts. To finalize a deal, you often needed a priest, a scribe, a seal, and someone named Enlil's cousin just in case. And if things still fell apart, you didn't just lose face, you could face divine curses. That's your quirky tidbit. Many tablets include little curses at the end, just in case. Lines like May Shamash, strike blind, he who lies about this grain, or whoever breaks this contract, shall find scorpions in their sandals. The ancient equivalent of saying cross me, and may your Wi-Fi never work again. Historians still argue whether these curses were purely symbolic, or whether people genuinely believed a botched loan might summon divine doom. Either way, they show up in nearly every major legal inscription, and sometimes even on lunch receipts. Back at the dispute, the scribe pulls a third tablet, an override clause lodged by a local elder, dated 3 days after the original contract. It was added without a witness. She raises one eyebrow. This override is invalid. No witness seal. The man gulps. She places the original contract flat on a stone slab, lifts a ceremonial rock, and smashes the tablet clean in two. The crowd gasps. You gasp. Then she says, "This deal is void. Return the ox, or offer a cow and 2 jars of oil, and next time, bring a scribe." Justice. Babylon style. You walk away stunned, not because of the ruling, but because of how everything hinged on tiny, baked details. A thumbprint here, a cracked corner there. Babylon doesn't believe in memory, it believes in proof. And when there's conflict, the receipts speak first. Before the law, before the curses, before the ox is even mooing. If it's not in clay, it didn't happen. As the sun finally dips, the crowd disperses, and the dispute scribe sits down with a new lump of clay to start again. You hear her mumble, "Ox, cloud excuse, add to records," and you think, someone will be reading that line 4,000 years from now. You wake the next day with a crick in your neck and the vague memory of dreaming in cuneiform. You're not sure what the symbols meant, possibly overdue lentils, or don't trust the fishmonger, but the clay world of Babylon has officially invaded your subconscious. This morning's plan? Simpler. You want to know how it all begins. Not the deals or the scandals, but the scribes themselves. How does someone end up dedicating their life to little wedges and angry sheep owners? You head toward the Eastern District, where laughter, chanting, and the unmistakable sound of someone dropping a tablet on their foot echo off the walls. Welcome to scribal school. You arrive at a squat building with open-air windows and a door that hangs slightly off its hinge. Inside, rows of young students sit on the floor, each one hunched over a slab of clay, tongues poking out in intense concentration. Their instructor, a middle-aged woman with the build of a wrestler and the attitude of a bored librarian, waves you in. "New student?" she asks. You shake your head. "Observer." "Fine. Sit. Don't breathe too loud." She claps her hands and the students begin chanting, syllables in sing-song. Gi, gi, ge, ge, gesh. It's mesmerizing. You feel your eyelids flutter. One kid throws a pebble at another and gets smacked with a damp reed. This is not a school of the future. This is survival training in stylus form. Mainstream historians know a lot about these schools, called adubba, or tablet houses. Boys would begin training as young as 7 or 8, learning symbols, pronunciation, mathematics and poetry, and also how to avoid smudging clay with sweaty elbows. You peek at a tablet belonging to a boy beside you. It reads something like, "1 basket of barley, owed by brother returned late." You ask if it's real. He whispers, "Fake, but emotionally true." Scribal exercises often included imaginary transactions, which is your quirky detail of the day. Students practiced making fake receipts for fake debt, essentially playing ancient taxes instead of dodgeball. Some of these tablets even ended with imaginary punishments, like, "May I be whipped with reeds if this is wrong." Brutally honest fan fiction. Historians still argue whether these practice tablets were ever stored or just tossed when the clay dried. Some Aduba dig sites show huge piles of broken tablets in back courtyards, an ancient form of paper recycling or emotional purging. Back in the school, the instructor bellows, "Who wrote 12 figs for the moon goddess? That's not an authorized offering." A girl in the corner snickers and starts rewriting her work. There's a rhythm to the room. Stylus to clay, chant to chant, mistake to correction. You realize that these kids are the ones who will one day write the loans, track the grain, document the curses, and maybe even sneak their own snarky notes into the margins. One boy hands you his tablet. It's messy. It leans a little left, but the symbols are clear enough. You read, "To borrow is to borrow trouble." He shrugs. "Teacher said I needed more philosophy." You thank him, gently place the tablet in the sun to dry, and step back into the world, the scent of clay and ambition still clinging to your clothes. Because here's the thing, every single tablet, every receipt, every contract, every scandal starts in rooms like this, with kids hunched over clay, learning to make sense of a chaotic world with nothing more than a reed and a handful of symbols. Babylon wasn't built in a day, but its receipts definitely written by 12-year-olds. You step out of the scribal school just as the sun begins to dip, casting long golden shadows across the alleys and rooftops. Babylon glows in this light. Even the clay glows a little, like it remembers something important. You decide to wander, not toward the temples or the beer jugs this time, but outward toward the quieter edges of the city, where farmers haul carts of dates and oxen splash lazily in irrigation canals. It's calmer here, less shouting, fewer goats pretending to be merchants. A young man rides past on a donkey, a scroll strapped to his back and a sack of clay tablets bouncing at his hip. You ask where he's going. "To deliver records," he says, "land agreements. One of them's for my aunt. She traded 3 rows of barley fields for a new roof and half a cow." He laughs, then adds, "She only got the roof." Welcome to the quiet miracle of Babylonian record keeping. Property, promises, and payment, tracked across generations. You follow him to a small cluster of homes surrounded by date palms. There, an old woman waits by a sun-bleached wall, already holding her seal in one hand and a stool in the other. She pats it. You sit. I read. She speaks slowly, with pride. "This tablet, here is my father's land grant, issued by a palace steward during the reign of King Samsu-Iluna. It says, 'To Ezratu, daughter of Lugal-Shuma, 2 furrows of irrigated field for service rendered, and grain unstolen.'" You blink. "Unstolen?" She nods. "That was important, back then." She unrolls a worn cloth, holding 4 more tablets, each tracing the land's history, trades, dowries, arguments, each transaction sealed, dated, and buried in baked clay. Mainstream historians marvel at these intergenerational records. In a world without centralized databases, Babylonians preserved land ownership through chains of receipts, each reinforcing the one before it. If you couldn't prove your grandmother's barley patch was legally yours, too bad. No harvest, no appeal. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some cases, the land wasn't what was recorded. It was the rights to water. Canals mattered more than fences. One tablet simply reads, "Right to draw 2 buckets from irrigation gate #7 before midday." That's specific. Historians still argue whether these water rights were enforced strictly or mostly ignored. Some tablets suggest elaborate disputes over stolen shade and canal-blocking frogs. The old woman tells you how her neighbor once tried to move a boundary stone. He said the river shifted. She cackles. "We shifted his roof." You're handed one of the tablets. Gently, reverently. The symbols are neat, aged, but still clear. It hums with memory. This one, she says, I wrote myself. I copied my mother's agreement before the stone cracked. Now it's safe forever. You sit there for a while, under a tree that's older than some empires, holding a document no modern lawyer could easily forge. And for the first time, Babylon doesn't feel bustling or loud or chaotic. It feels remembered. Every tablet, a whisper from the past. Every mark, a moment saved, not just for a day or a season, but for people not yet born. For you, the wind shifts just a little. As you rise from your spot beneath the date palm, Babylon begins to wind down. Smoke curls from clay ovens. Children chase each other with reeds. Somewhere, a temple bell tolls low and slow, marking the end of business. The market stalls close. The scribes stop scratching, and the last barley deal of the day is sealed, probably with slightly more beer than necessary. You make your way through the quieting streets, past the gates where guards yawn dramatically, past the pen of loudly indifferent goats, and finally to a low building with a familiar smell: clay, old oil, ink, and history. Inside is the tablet shelf, not grand, not ornate, just rows of mud brick lined with wooden slats. You've seen it before, but tonight you feel something different. You gently return the borrowed tablet from earlier, your cheese receipt still slightly crooked, and place it in an open slot. The shelf creaks. The other tablets seem to lean in, like they're making room. You sit on a low bench, watching the shadows settle over Babylon. It's here that the quiet genius of receipts truly hits you. Every one of those tablets is a thread, some fragile, some strong, woven through time. A sack of grain here, a goat trade there, a child's first practice signature, a merchant's beer rations, a temple's curse on the guy who didn't pay back his sheep. And yet somehow they all lasted, because Babylon didn't write for style, it wrote for certainty. Mainstream historians often say Babylon's greatest invention was writing, but maybe it wasn't writing for poetry, or myth, or kings. Maybe it was writing for accountability, for truth, for peace of mind. Here's your final quirky detail. Among thousands of clay tablets discovered in archives, one reads only, paid, fully, stop asking. Scholars believe it was a frustrated note from a scribe to a persistent tax collector. Historians still argue whether that counts as the first unsubscribe message. The shelf before you is silent now, but if you lean in close, if you imagine the scribe's stylus tapping wet clay, the whisper of papyrus baskets, the dry click of seals, the low chant of students practicing their symbols, you'll hear it, a hum, a soft, dusty hum of a civilization that never forgot a deal, a debt, or a name. And maybe, just maybe, that's what kept it alive for so long. You rise. One last glance at the shelf, one last breath of air, warmed by baked clay and time. Then the lights dim, and the city dreams. You're walking now, slowly through the sleeping streets. The air is cooler, the laughter has faded, the torches are flickering low. You pass the places you visited. The scribe's stall with the cracked tablets, the courtyard of that wool scandal, the school where a dozen sleepy children leaned over their clay with dreams of barley and beer rations dancing in their heads. Every step feels quieter. You notice how the dust glows in the moonlight, how the rooftops seem to lean into one another like they're trading secrets. Babylon, even at rest, is full of echoes, and you carry them with you. A stylus stroke, a seal press, the soft press of a thumb into warm clay, the feeling of something ancient, yet strangely familiar. Maybe tomorrow you'll write your own receipt again. Maybe you'll remember the sound of goats in the distance, the way a scribe raised one eyebrow when a contract smelled fishy, or how important it felt to hold something small and silent, yet so full of meaning. But for now, there's nothing more to do. just drift. The city is resting. The clay is cool, and the records, still here, still waiting, still whispering,